All right, Esther chapter 4. Won't take time to review. We know where we are, right? The edict has now gone out, and it has been read in all of the provinces, in the language of the province. And so all of these Jews know what is about to happen to them. Oh, by the way, before we really get going, remember last week, and I told you that what I had read, that included to be about 15 million Jews. And then Debbie's like, well, what's the percentage of that? So then Debbie, the good student that she is, and then later in the week, Janet, the good student that she is, they both looked it up, found the same answer. I'm not sure that you found it on the same website, though, because you texted me and you emailed me, so I didn't check a link with you. But anyway, but what they both found, and what I had read too, was that the empire included about 50 million people. So if the Jews are 15 million of that, 30%.
I had to use the calculator on my phone.
Very good. You got a calculator, brain. When it comes to numbers, I choose words. So I default to number people. But anyway, that gives us that answer to that question. And also, do you remember last week we were talking about how Mordecai was able to go to Esther and talk to her, and I was like, oh, I know when after the edict is read that he didn't go and talk to her, and I can't remember why. Why didn't he just go and talk to her? Well, it's plain as day in our lesson tonight as to why he didn't go directly to Esther and talk to Esther. I hope you picked up on that, and I hope maybe you remembered, that question from last week, but it's one of those things that's completely slipped my mind. But it's a very valid reason as to why he didn't go there, and it starts in verse 1 of chapter 4. So when Mordecai learned that all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city. And he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. And he went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. There's the answer to my question from last week. Why wasn't he able to talk to Esther himself? Now, I do have another question that comes up later about that very thing. And I don't know. I'm going to ask you guys, because I don't know that there is an answer, but I'd like to pick your brains on that. But we'll talk about that when we get there. So we have sackcloth and ashes. Let me read you something. People then would commonly wear loose-fitting, dark-colored, coarse garments made of goat's hair, which hung on them like a large gunny sack. On top of that, they would take ashes from the remains of a fire and throw them on themselves, so that they would be covered with them and appear ghastly and unclean. Sometimes they would even sit in the midst of a cold ash heap and throw the ashes on themselves as a vivid expression of their grief. So think of sackcloth and ashes as an outward demonstration of how a person was feeling inside. They were a very demonstrative society. To us, if we saw this, I don't know about you, I'd probably cross the street or go the other way. This scares me. It is a statue, I think. But I think it's a really good statue because it's supposed to be lifelike enough in that this is what they were supposed to look like after they have thrown the ashes all over them, giving them a ghostly kind of appearance. But we have to step out of our society and culture once again and enter that culture and realize this is just the way that they did it. I mean, you just read the Old Testament, you read about the mourning process. So Mordecai's not the only one ever to have done that. And we know at this time, he wasn't the only one to do it because we're told that this happened in all of the provinces, right? So if we're told that it happens in all of the provinces, we can probably assume that he wasn't the only one in Susa that did this as well. So other Jews that lived there in the capital city around the palace would have been doing the same thing. We're only told about him, but we're also told that he made his way around town, right? He went to the city's, what does it say? He went to the midst of the city, and he was crying out with a loud and bitter cry. And then he went up to the entrance of the king's gate. Why would he go there? well, look at me, and hopefully to garner some attention from whoever's on the other side of that gate, right? Because we can assume, based on what we read for the rest of the chapter, nobody on the other side of that wall seemed to have a clue what was going on. Okay? By that, let's keep going, because you'll see what I mean in case you didn't catch it. Verse 3. And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews. So we know, like I said, he wasn't the only one. With fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. Now, verse 4. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. I learned something this time, late in the week, that I never got before from that verse. And I've read it quite a few times. When you look and say, okay, the young women and the eunuchs came and told her, what did they tell her? What news is Esther getting in this verse?
I don't think she knew about the edict.
No. So what news is she getting in this verse?
We're gonna die.
No, she didn't learn about the edict in this verse. Mordecai is the one that tells her about the edict. This is where I kind of jumped ahead of the story when I read this. What news does Esther get right now?
Mordecai is outside of the gates.
Mordecai's outside the gate. That's all they came and told her. And so the young women and the eunuchs that are assigned to her come and say, hey, Mordecai's outside the gate. He's in sackcloth and ashes. He's yelling. And we're told what? What about Esther?
She's distressed.
She's deeply distressed. Every word has a purpose, right? Every word has reason to be there. Let me give you a great word picture here with that word distressed. It means to twist, to whirl, to dance, to writhe, fear, tremble, travail, be in anguish, be pained, or to whirl about. She had a very physical reaction, right? Can't you just whirl? Mm-hmm. To whirl about, twirl, dance, whatever. It wasn't like, oh, Mordecai is mourning. No, it wasn't that. Sorry. It's audio, it's not video. Aren't you glad for that? No, it was the writhing, like you could just see her wringing her hands and marching around the room and turning around. She was deeply distressed over the news that Mordecai was deeply distressed over something which she did not know about yet. That tells us a little bit about Esther. We can understand her being deeply distressed over the news that Mordecai sends to her. But as we read through the next verses, I've read through them twice, just in the last 2 days, trying to find the answer to the question, do we get any kind of other emotional information about Esther? Just in this chapter. And as we read through, I can miss stuff, okay? But this has intrigued me since I realized in this verse, this is dealing with just Mordecai's mourning that has deeply distressed her. So as we go through, you think, oh, she's deeply distressed to find out that Mordecai is so upset, and she's twirling and wringing her hands, and just as this physical reaction, what must she have been like when Mordecai actually sends her why he's acting that way? And we're not even told that she had any kind of reaction like that. So to me, that's an incredible control of emotions through this whole thing. It's a wonderful study in being emotionally driven or emotional yet controlled. There's a difference. I think it goes back to our react and respond, right? Everything seems to go back to that. I don't even have to try, and it all just seems to go back to that. Anyway, let's keep going, but keeping the emotion thing in mind as we read. So we're told in let's keep reading 4. She was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. As I studied this lesson through, I had so many questions. You know me, lady with questions, that sometimes you can't find an answer to, but they're just, sometimes my imagination gone wild, but sometimes they're just really neat to kind of think about to expand the story a little bit. If she sent clothes to Mordecai, why? Why? I mean, he probably looked bad in sackcloth and ashes. But why would the first thing that she did would be to send him clothes? So that he could come in and see her. Now, she's good. You need to sit right up here, teacher's pet. No. But think about this, though. Instead of taking them so that he could go and see her, because wouldn't it have been easier for Mordecai to have just gone to Esther and told him everything? Instead, the rest of our chapter is, okay, Esther's going to send some people. And then Mordecai's going to say, now you go back and tell her this. And then Esther's going to go, but you go back and tell him this. They go back. And then Mordecai's going to go, but you need to go back and tell her this. That happens that many times in this chapter, right? So wouldn't it have been easier if Mordecai had just taken those clothes and gone and done it himself instead of having to have these poor servant people running back and forth? Plus, you know what happens. There's sometimes things lost in translation. When you're starting to, have third parties involved in spreading news. Why didn't he take them? We're not told, so you're not wrong. I mean, I would assume she would have sent the right size, so you don't have to say maybe they didn't fit.
If it's the whole sackcloth and ashes thing really meant to him what it was supposed to be, and it wasn't for show, how could he take it?
That's why I said at the beginning, it's an outward manifestation of how they really felt inside, so maybe he wasn't ready to take that off. So I had thought that, possibly so. What about, I don't know what Jewish custom was. Was there, once you put it on, did you have to have it on for 3 days or 2 days? We know even within this chapter he takes it off because of where we're told he is. Catch that later when we read. I don't know. But for some reason, he kept it on, stayed outside the gate, and preferred the messenger method. But things like that, when you slow down and you read slowly, ask yourself kind of those questions because it really does get you, and then you go out and you walk and you exercise and you can ponder things like that. It's just what I do when I'm not talking to neighbors and whatever. Let's keep going as I trip over my sheet. Then Esther called for Hatak, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her. Stop there, look back up in verse 4. He was probably among that first group because it says the young women and the eunuchs that the king had assigned to her. So he was probably one of that group. But for some reason, out of that whole group, she chooses him. And I find it very interesting. You know how I like to look up names? His name means verily or truly. So maybe she chose him because, hey, this guy, if I'm going to send him, he'll come back with an accurate report from Mordecai. So there was something about him, and his name fitted, I guess, and she chose him out of these other eunuchs to go. She ordered him, verse 5, middle, to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. I find that interesting. Why is that repeated? I don't know. I can't tell you, but it's kind of like, what is going on? Why is it? You can just hear her asking all of these questions. Verse 6, Hatak went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay in the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. There's 2 slides worth of stuff right there. Because slow down and say, what in the world did Mordecai say he needed Esther to know? Well, all that had happened to him. Well, let's rehearse. What probably is he referring to? I'm doubting that it goes as far back as, you remember last week we talked about Big Tom and Teresh, the 2 that were going to assassinate the king. I said, keep that closer to, chapter 2, and let's put the story of Haman closer to, now we're up to 12 years in the reign, right? So that's where we formulated our gap. So if I'm thinking that Mordecai is reporting all that had happened to him, he's going to talk about how I'm not bowing down. Haman knows that I'm a Jew and knows I'm not bowing down to him now. And here's what he did. Also, what I find interesting is Mordecai tells her the sum of money that Haman promised the king. Now, if you go back and you read the end of chapter 3, we're told what that edict says that went out to all the provinces. Do you know in the report of what the edict says, there's nothing about money? How in the world would Mordecai know that information to tell Esther that, hey, for 10,000 talents, this is what he's doing this for? So there's an argument for those who think that Mordecai had a position in which he was in the know in the palace, because how else would he have known that? He tells her that, make sure she knows the plan for destroying the Jews, and he even had a written copy, which, nowadays we can print anything off in our own homes. Wasn't quite so easy back then. So the fact that Mordecai had his own copy was quite telling too. So of course, here's another Chris question. Did Mordecai know about this before it was actually read to the city? I don't know. Did he? Or was it such that it was a Haman sneaky thing and he just had those extra men around him and they did this in a room and then they had a scribe write it all these different languages and send it out and other people within the palace never even knew? I don't know. It kind of makes you wonder, when did Mordecai find this out if he already had insider information? So then, as you go on into, verses 8 and 9, well, let's see, 7 and 8, here's what he says. You make sure, you tell her all that I told you. You show this to her so that she sees this paper. You explain it to her so that she hears it. I mean, Esther probably could have read that for herself. But he's like, don't leave it at that. You let her see it so that she knows this is a for real thing. And then you tell her what's in it. So make sure she understands completely in case she decides she's going to read it tomorrow. We don't have time. And then you command her, and you tell Esther that she has to go and talk to the king. Not send him a message. He is I think 2 times maybe, he specifies that she has to go. You don't send him a message. You don't, text, email, all of that. You go face to face with this king. And of all of what he says to her, that seems to be the one thing that strikes Esther. Because let's keep reading. In verse 9, and Hatak went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hatak and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come to the king these 30 days. And it's funny to me that she starts out with, everybody knows this, but even though everybody knows this, I'm going to tell you again anyway. Just to be clear. So look at her reply. It includes the fact that she doesn't comment on the news, only comments on the plea by Mordecai that she needs to go to the king. And because of the fear of assassination, the king was always surrounded by people who were just supposed to kill anybody that goes into this court. In just a little bit, I have a slide that's going to help give us a really good visual of where everything is. I told you before, I'm a very visual person, so if you are, I have a slide in a little bit that's going to help you picture all this so much better. And then she says she had not been summoned for these 30 days. I was intrigued by the use of the word these, because, these 30 days, when did that 30 days start? Is she talking about a month? And it can be interpreted probably one of 2 ways. Either in the last 30 days, so for 30 days, and we're at day 30 or 31, she hasn't been called in, which kind of strikes me because is she checking it off? How did she know right off, this is day 30, he has not called, texted, anything, but she is the queen, and she may feel that way because you have to wonder, when's he going to get tired of me, because he's perpetually bringing in new people. So you probably would live with that fear of, he's going to get tired of me one of these days, and I'm going out to pasture, But it could also mean within this month. So, we're in the month of February, so I could say, in these 28 days, whatever, referring to the month of February as these 28 days. So it could be within that month. She may have seen him 2 weeks ago, if that's the case. Make sense? Nothing to waste time on, but, you know, I like to pick those words apart and have fun with them. Let me see where I am. I'm getting ahead of myself. Oh. Look at the end of verse 8. I wondered if you caught this. Mordecai's telling Hatak to go back to her. And he says, go to Esther, explain it to her, and command her to go to the king and beg his favor and plead with him. How's that verse end? Did you catch that before when you read it? What now? If he did not know before, does Hatak now know about Esther?
She's Jewish.
Did you catch that before now? I mean, it may have been in the book. I can't remember. I do read the book along with you, but I can't remember because I read a bunch of other stuff too. Now Hatak knows she's a Jewish queen, and now knows, based on what Mordecai has told him, what's going on. And remember, when these young women and the eunuchs first showed up to Esther and told them, hey, Mordecai's out the gate, it doesn't appear that they knew why he was there either, or they would have told her. So there's this seclusion in the palace area that these people did not know what was going on outside the walls and among all of the provinces. So up to this point, Hatak did not know, probably, about this edict. So at this point in talking to Mordecai, he finds out what's going to happen to the Jews, and he finds out that Esther, who just sent him, is one. Now who does he work for? He works for the king. So at this point, Hatak could have, he knew information, right? He could have said, hey, forget Esther. I'm going straight to the king. I'm going to tell him what's going on. God in his sovereignty did not allow that to happen. Could be one of the reasons Esther handpicked somebody whose name meant verily and truly, right? So Mordecai said, you go tell Esther this. He goes and tells Esther this. He doesn't bypass her and go to the king. So that's one of those little things where if somebody had wanted to and God had allowed that to happen, this whole story would have been completely changed. But it wasn't, because that wasn't God's plan. And going on, let's see. So, verses 12 to 14. Let's go there. If I can find it. There we go. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther. Here we go, back again. Oh. And they told Mordecai, who Hatak went the first time. And we're told Hatak went the first time. Now we've got, and they. And then Mordecai told them. So now, the second time these, they have to go back and give, Esther's reply to Mordecai, more than one person is going. So things like that catch my eye. Who are they? I have no idea. Why did more go? Because I sense some excitement building in a way. It's like, okay, you want us to go? I'll go with you. I want to go hear what Mordecai has to say about this. I don't want to sit here and wait for him to come back. I kind of sense that's my imagination. But more people went back to Mordecai that second time. Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape with any more than all the other Jews. Or any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? This is the verse that you hear quoted a whole bunch. But let's look at his second message back to her. He at first says, Esther, you gotta realize that just because you live in the palace does not mean that you are excluded from this edict. This edict says all Jews. It's a Medes and Persian law. You're a Jew. You're as good as dead. It doesn't matter where you live. And his second thing to her, he says, Esther's silence would not prevent deliverance from coming from another source. God's the deliverer here. I got something I want to read to you, which I thought was really good on that point. It says, Mordecai's trust was in the faithfulness of God, not in the faithfulness of Esther. He knows that God will not let his people down, even if individuals let God down. Mordecai reminded Esther that though the fate of God's people rested in God and not in her, her own fate depended on her own faithfulness to God. That's a lot to wrap your hands around to read. That's kind of one of those things you need to read 2 or 3 times. But it's like, God's going to save his people. God has promised to save his people. And so he reminds her of that. But he also reminds her, he can save his people and lose a few along the way. And you will be one of those lost along the way. And so, you need to do something here. And if she rejected the will of God for her life, God's still going to save the people. And then the third thing, he reminds her that her position in that palace was no accident. And this is the point I just visualize Mordecai kind of stepping out of the situation. Hey, no!
Took the exit already. Oh my. What time is that?
Okay, I'll be with you in a moment. What am I doing? Escape and start it over? There we go. Sorry, people. It's just going to be one of those nights. There we go. Here's my picture. I liked my picture. My computer apparently doesn't. Okay, we're going to go through these again in case you didn't get them the first time. All right, there it was. We're going to just start on that one and see what that does. There it is. We might just have to look at that the rest of the night. But anyway, Mordecai at this point would have to be stepping out of his crisis and looking at the big picture. It's a wonderful lesson that perhaps maybe some of us need to learn. Are you one that's prone to like an emotional freak out when something happens? And that's why I said pay attention in these verses and see if, we understand that at the beginning Esther's deeply distressed, but after that it seems like they are emotional, but yet they're concocting a plan. They're emotional and logical at the same time. That is a testimony of grace. Only grace can help a person be that way. And you see Mordecai maybe just stepping out of the crisis for a minute and go, hey, Esther, you remember way back when your parents died and you came to live with me? Okay, I didn't go back to Jerusalem with everybody because you lived with me. And so I stayed here. And you remember that time 9 years ago when they came and knocked on the door and said, hey, she's pretty, she's going with us? And you remember that time 9 years ago I walked up and down outside the harem asking about you every single day? And, we know the end of the story, but he didn't know that this day was coming. And you can almost just see Mordecai sitting there in his sackcloth going, this just might be why all of that happened. Maybe this is why that all had to happen to me, and maybe why they took Esther. And he reminds Esther of that, which is a wonderful thing to do in a point of crisis, is to remember God's sovereignty in the past and how he does orchestrate everything. He's in control of it all. But he's reminding Esther of this. He's outside the gate. He doesn't know if she's freaking out inside. And not going in himself to see for himself. And that's why, remember Joseph. Perfect example of someone who could step out of what happened to him and look at the big picture. I just actually read through this story. I've got this Bible plan. I've been reading through the Bible and finished Genesis, and I was reading all about Joseph very recently and saw this. And when he is there with his brothers have come to Egypt because they're starving. And he reveals himself to them, and he has the power to kill them all. He doesn't have to give them anything. After all they did to him, and lying to the father about what they did to him. And he looks at them and says, but as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, for such a time as this. Joseph could have said the exact same words that Mordecai just said to Esther, to save many people alive. Only a sovereign God is great enough to decree freedom of choice for men and women, and only a sovereign God could fulfill his wise and loving purposes in this world and even make evil cooperate with producing good. That goes back to that first lesson when we talked about sovereignty and providence, that I cannot wrap my hands around how God really lets people do their own thing, but he is still working his plan out. at the same time. But I found this. I got to make sure I stay on task here. Goodness, I'm a mess. I actually heard this illustration with a cruise ship at first, but then I got to thinking, well, it's kind of true with an airplane too. And this kind of helps me to understand. I told you I'm a visual person. So you got this big ship, or you have this plane, and when they are underway, they are underway. And you've got all these people on this ship who are going up and down stairs, some going down the hallway this way, some going this way, some are in a pool, some are eating, some are, out on the deck getting a suntan, whatever. But the ship is still underway, making progress, going to a destination, right? While all of these people are on the ship doing their own thing. And so the sovereignty of God, it is such a weak illustration, but it kind of helped to understand the sovereignty of God is like that. It is going, it is moving, and God is moving this ship right through the water, and it's going to get exactly to where God wants that ship to go, while all these people are on board thinking they're independent and doing their own thing. I mean, I've been on a plane plenty of times where I have to get up, and the bathroom's always in back. And so the plane is going, and I walk to the back of the plane, and that plane has never slowed down one time because I was walking the opposite direction. If it does, diet plan. But does that help at all to get a visual of the fact that God's sovereignty is moving everything toward His end purpose, while everybody on board is doing their own thing, thinking, that they're being independent and making their own choices, but it doesn't affect at all where that ship is going to end up. If that didn't help you, I'm sorry. It's just nice pictures and think of vacation, okay? I'm sorry. Does anybody else want to do this? I seem to be falling apart tonight. All right, where are we? We are on verses 15 to 17. I'll leave the nice vacation pictures up there for you for just a little bit longer. All right, verse 15. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "You go, you gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law." She's going to make sure he remembers that. "And if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had told him. Now her plan, she tells him, you go, you get all the people, all the Jews in Susa, you hold a fast for 3 days and you don't eat or drink night or day. Nothing. And that had me right there. Esther said she would do the same thing, and then after 3 days, she would go and approach the king. It's always good to summarize like this. It just kind of helps you to, make sure you don't lose out on a detail. Look at this. We are to consult with God regarding every decision, word, thought, or response. Before we move ahead or merely react, we need to stop and pray. What would God have me to do, think, or say here? Now, somewhere from Elizabeth George. I'm not sure if it's from this book or another one that I read, and I didn't write the page number down, and I hate that when I do that, but I wasn't about to go to try to find it again. What I appreciate about Esther here and how we see she's not emotionally driven, she was willing not to act immediately. Me, I fix things now. I don't like to wait. I want it fixed. I start concocting a plan. We're going to do this now and just get it over with so we don't have to think about it anymore. Anybody else relate to that? Whereas she says, okay, Mordecai, here's what we're going to do. We need some time. We need some time to fast. Do you know prayer is not mentioned? But prayer is assumed. Because why in the world would they ever fast and not pray along with that? Because if they were to fast and not add prayer to that, fasting is just a futile exercise. Yes, they'd just be hungry. But you know what? There's a lesson there that we could stop and park on for a little bit and realize, everything that we do is pretty much a futile exercise if it's not backed by prayer and backed by God. Right? And so, teaching a study, playing a piano, being a mom, being a teacher, whatever it is, It's not just fasting. Oh, I'm holy because I fast. But everything else is not consecrated to God. Everything should be. And everything should be backed by prayer. And I really appreciate the emphasis on prayer in this church. Because you cannot have too much of that. So prayer is assumed. So even earlier when we know that they're fasting in all of the other provinces, we can pretty much assume that they were praying along with that fast as well. So look, she says, if I perish, I perish. Looked up that word. Do you remember in that edict, and we talked about that last week, how Haman in that edict says, okay, on this day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, all of the Jews are going to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. And put them all up there and said, why in the world do you have to repeat himself? Because he kind of graduated in his anger. Not just going to kill you or destroy you. I am going to murder you. And I am going to wipe you off the face of the earth forever. He got very dramatic. And the perish here is the same as it was in that edict where she says, if I get wiped off the face of the earth forever, then so be it. This is what I will do. After we take 3 days to make sure we know God's plan. And we know that it was during that 3 days that God must have given her the plan of go to the king, ask him to come to a feast. Where did she come up with that? There's no manual for how to save your race. She didn't go to the library and pull that one out. So God had to have given her that plan, and God needed her to take that time to spend with him to prepare her. And you know what? Esther's not a stranger to preparation, is she? Right? You go back to chapter 2, where we learned all about the preparation she had to do before she even met the king. So Esther knows the importance of preparation. So this is the second time we see Esther preparing herself for something. Probably a lesson for us in that as well. Not jumping into something, taking the time to prepare yourself, prepare things around you, but prepare yourself for the task that you're about to undertake. So look here. Oh, you got to remember, this is exactly opposite of what happened to Vashti. Vashti got thrown out of the palace for not going to the king when he called her. What's Esther risking? She's risking for going without being called. Completely opposite to her predecessor and how she ended up in the position in the first place. I thought that was kind of cool to think about that way. So here are the obstacles. And I put obstacles there, and I thought, you know what, I could have taken that out and put excuses. Esther could have said, nothing I can do because of the law. The law says I can't approach the king. That would have been enough probably to make me stay home. How about you? And then the government was against her because the government's the one that put that decree out in the first place for the Jews to be executed. And then her gender was against her because we know the king didn't treat women too well. So that was against her. The king's guards, because they surrounded him and they're commanded to kill her if she gets in that inner court. So, that's an excuse. And then the fast. She could have used the fast as an excuse because how pretty and, strong and, whatever would she have been after not eating or drinking for 3 days? Apparently she was still pretty because she caught his eye out in that inner court. But, after 3 days of not eating, I don't know. I probably would have said, forget the king. I'll go after breakfast. But anyway.
Think about how Daniel, though,
Exactly.
Daniel restricted himself, and yet they were stronger, more vibrant.
Exactly. And
Sometimes
so,
you purify yourself.
very good. Very good. Good example. So I immediately thought of this verse, though. If God be for us, who can be against us? And there's also, when a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. So she took time, rather than thinking of, how am I going to go please that king, to try to get him to listen to me. She took the time to please the Lord first by fasting and praying and spending that time with him. And then he honored that by making her enemies to be at peace with her. So that's a great verse to go alongside of that. So, chapter 5. So, verse 1 sets quite the stage for us. This is where we get to have some fun. On the third day of that fast, Esther put on her royal robes. So she is doing this while all of the Jews are still praying and fasting. She didn't wait until it was all over and then goes and does this. On that third day, she does it while she knows she has that prayer support of all of the other Jews around. Kind of neat, isn't it? You know, have you ever had to go do something and you've got all these people behind you, wherever they are, maybe around the world, who are like, I'm praying for you today. I know you have to do something really difficult. I'm praying for you today. Have you ever felt that force behind you when people are doing that and they rally around you and they know that you've got their back in prayer? That is, if you've never had that feeling, that is quite a feeling. I bet you've experienced that a few times in the last several years, haven't you?
Yeah.
And so that, I hadn't picked up on that either before this time through, and I thought, well, that's pretty neat that she went ahead and she did this while the fasting and praying was still going on. So she puts on her royal robes. She stood in the inner court of the king's palace, in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne, inside the throne room, opposite the entrance to the palace. Detail. But then you're looking at that going, okay, that's a lot of detail, a lot of prepositional phrases, right? Yeah, well, sort of. And so in my mind, I'm wanting to picture what this looks like. So I did it for us. This is where I wish I had my remote, because I got all kinds of things to click on. So here you have the Shushan, the palace. And you have to, I didn't want to put a whole bunch of pictures up here and belabor this, but the palace itself was actually built on a man-made mountain of about 300 acres. And they built it up in what I understand to be like 3 terraces or 3 levels, with the palace being at the very top. Now that's not super uncommon for that to happen, because you want the height so that you can be protected better. So you can see the enemies coming. You know, it's easier to shoot down than it is to shoot up. So it's more protected for them to be up on top of this man-made mountain. Now, this particular area, I'm not sure how big it is, but I know it's huge because the whole palace itself with the terraces encompassed about 300 acres, like I said. But this is big, and if you look even like right here, that's supposed to be like little people walking into that gate. So it's big. To give us some perspective, I told you about that already. See, this is called an apadana. Never heard of that word before, but it just has to do with the big meeting hall of a palace. Usually the part that has those big columns that we just think of with those, palaces and the big columns. And this was 244 feet wide, 340 feet long. It was huge. They've uncovered all of this. They actually have some columns left from this. They can, if you read, you can find all kinds of information about this. But they had like rows of 6 columns, and then behind were another row of 6 columns. And they even know how spaced apart those columns were. So you can start reading things, and you get the feel that this thing was huge. That would have been where the king had his feast that started out the book of Esther. So that's the great meeting hall where all the big parties took place. The public could come in by invitation, but it was still guarded, so it wasn't like somewhere you could go on an average day. It's part of the palace itself. Then you look back here. You have from what I read, I try to figure all of this out. Some models kind of tell you for sure. None of them said for sure that these were the harems. But by what I read, and I know that they're supposed to be L-shaped, this really was the only L-shaped place around the king's quarters that they could be. So I'm assuming that's what it is. And it would make sense, too, because you look at it this way. That's probably considered one house, and that's probably considered the other house. And we know by our prior study there were 2 houses of the harems, because one would be for the ones before they went to the king, and one's for the wives after they have gone and been with the king. And you see, you have a wall all the way around, and there's plenty of space to walk. So I can just envision, whether it's this one or this one, Mordecai would have been every day back and forth, either here or here in front of that house, inquiring about Esther. Because it would have still been within the walls of the palace. Now, keeping in mind, we said that this whole thing was a whole little secluded city in itself. And once you go out the main gate, this is all out here where the Jews are fasting and praying, and Mordecai was out here, and he couldn't get in there. So all these people that are in there apparently did not know and do not keep tabs on what's going on out here. So
I like Washington, D.C.
there you go. Yeah. So we have the king's quarters and the throne room there. So he would have lived in there and maybe upstairs or something and then gone downstairs. And that's the throne room was also called, in some of the things I read, the audience hall. So if you actually got an audience with the king, that's where you would go and he would be in there. That's where you would do business with the king. So then, this is where I am still confused. And I've tried to unconfuse myself. Not working too well. But let me just confuse you. Okay? Well, I'll be confused. Down here you have what is called, in a lot of the things about the palace, the Great Gate. But it's also called the King's Gate or Xerxes' Gate more often than the King's Gate. Now we're told all the time that Mordecai sat at the King's Gate. What was his job? Well, I don't know. We speculated, but where exactly did Mordecai work? Where was he? Well, I'm thinking, well, he could work in and you got to think to scale. This right here is huge. I don't know the dimensions. I did see them. I didn't write them down. But this is huge, and anybody that came in would come in through this gate, and it was almost like customs and immigration, maybe. You know, you didn't just walk into the palace area. You went in there, and you had to get cleared. And probably had to be some certain reason that you were coming to the palace that day. So was Mordecai one of those people who would actually work there, and then anybody that would come in, he would be one of the vetting people. You know, that would make sense too, that there would have been security people in there. And that was Bigtan and Teresh. Remember, they were security people, and they were the ones plotting to kill the king. I don't know, but I'm sure there were security people everywhere. So I might just be as way off base as off base could be. Because if you look here, something I read said the King's Gate, where Mordecai worked, was a big square building, and it was right next to the king's quarters, and that's where judicial things took place. So it had to be right next to where the king was so that things could be signed by him, etc., etc. So then it could be there, but it could be there, or it could be there. Because one thing I read said it was an elongated building that was behind the Apadana, that was in front of the king's throne room. I don't know where the King's Gate was. Actually, what makes the most sense to me would probably be that big entry area right there. Like I said, that's just a guess too. So then, ta-da, we have the inner court where Esther goes in her robes. The king is in his throne room. There's a door there. He must be back here. We're said he's opposite from the entrance of the palace, whether it's being considered from the King's Gate there or the Apandana, but we know he's way back here, and he's sitting there and he's looking out into this inner court and he sees Esther. Now, there's a door or a gate or whatever they want to call it right there, and there's one right there. This was heavily guarded, and I'm thinking also Bigtan, Teresh, if it said they guarded the threshold, it could be that they guarded that because whoever got past that had complete access to the king. That was like the last of fortress right there that you had to get through in order to get to the king. So maybe they worked there. Maybe Mordecai worked there. I don't know. But we do know this is the inner court. That's where Esther was. And so she came in, and if she were to breach either one of these doors, anybody that breached those doors, dead. That's the seriousness of it. That's why she, went back to Mordecai about that. One thing, I'm not sure if that was the last thing I had for my builds, but I wanted to show you this. Like I said, you got to think grand scale because this doesn't really do it for us. But this courtyard right here was for military exercises. And that's what they had deduced by excavating the palace. He said this was huge. They probably had the armies come in, put on shows for the king to maybe practice their marching or whatever in there. Because do you see these poles right there? They actually, you can go there, I'm told, or I read, and there are holes still in the ground. I don't know if any of the poles are there, but those are flag poles that they would have had the flags going, and they're still there. today. And when they excavated this, they took a lot of stuff. And if you go to the Louvre Museum, there's like a whole Persian exhibit there. And I know somebody that actually went 2 summers ago. She had all kinds of pictures of things from that we studied in the book of Esther that are there on display, at the Louvre, just drinking things, glasses and whatever that are from the palace statues. There are columns that are there. Anyway, I thought that was kind of cool. But let's keep going. Does that help you to visualize maybe a little bit better what we're talking about? And I hope it does, because it did for me. So let's keep going in chapter 5. So in verse 2, and when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight. That can also be read as she obtained favor. A little bit different. We've read that in recent verses. She obtained favor in the harem. And we've dissected that a little bit. But what I want you to notice, though, is that she won this favor is passive. It wasn't anything that she did. It was favor that was done for her. So it's a passive voice to that. And the only explanation, because there was nothing that she was doing other than standing there, is that God gave her favor in the eyes of the king. So when it says she obtained favor, she won favor, you can superimpose in your Bible if you want to, God gave her favor to the king. And that's a good way of looking at that and understanding that a little bit better. Okay, so let's finish up. And he held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. My imagination goes crazy on this one, because she's standing there. We're not told anything about her feelings at the moment. And can you imagine when she how long did she have to stand there before he noticed her? And then he sees her, and their eyes meet. And there's that moment of, oh my word, he saw me. What's he going to do now? And when he saw her, and I probably would have just dropped dead at that moment. But we know she's a much more courageous woman than I am for, just the fact that she is there. But, when their eyes met and she had that moment of, what's he going to do? Sorry. and he held out his scepter. Could you just imagine? I mean, my knees probably would have just given out at that point. He's not going to kill me. At that moment, the plan was going perfectly. Oh, it had to be such a relief when she saw that scepter and she knew she got to keep her head that day. And then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you even to half of my kingdom." And he uses that phraseology again. And I'm thinking, he really would give her half of all of that? No. Everything I read said that's kind of like a rhetorical thing. It's not going to give her half of it. It's like I would look at you and say, "I'd do anything in the world for you." Well, I can't do anything in the world for you. I'm limited. I do almost everything. No. So it was just kind of like a thing that he would have said. He really wasn't going to give her half of the kingdom. And he said, like I said, he said it again later. So he says, verse 4, and Esther said, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king." There's a lesson there. Does she say, if it please the king, would you and Haman come to a feast? I'll go home real quick and throw something together. What does she say? She's already prepared it. She didn't even know if she was going to go home and get to eat that food herself, right? She didn't know if her mouth would be over here and her body would be over here, right? Think about it. You could have cut her head off. So before she went in there and she got herself dolled up, she had a feast being prepared. So there's a little thing I always like to say, don't pray for rain and then leave your umbrella at home. If you're going to pray for rain, take your umbrella, right? And if you don't want it to rain, then leave your umbrella at home. And if God decides it's going to rain, you're going to look really awful, but you prayed in faith, right? Anyway, So there's a lesson in faith right there where she had prepared herself for those days of praying and fasting. She knew this was God's plan that he had given to her to go and do. So she went ahead and prepared that feast because I think she had ultimate faith that God had this plan worked out. And if he told her to do a feast, she did a feast. And that she would be alive to go and eat that feast. So, verse 5, the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther has asked." So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even the half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." So of course he says that again. Told you I was full of questions this time around. And I'm looking at that and I went back and reread. When he first asked her, "Esther, what do you want? What do you want me to do?" And she goes, "I want you to come to a feast." She does not say, "I want you to come to a feast and then I'll tell you what I want." So how did the king know that she had something else? How did he assume that, or why didn't he assume that the feast was actually what she wanted? Maybe she just missed it and she wanted to have dinner with him. But see, I found that interesting. Never tells us how he knew that she still had something to ask him. But she did, as we know. In verse 7, then Esther answered, "Well, my wish and my request is." Now, do you think she paused then? Do you think the plan all along was 2 feasts? What do you think? I mean, there's no right or wrong. We don't know. Do you really think when she made... She might have sensed that exactly. And you know, that we can attribute, perhaps, if that is the reason, to all of that time of praying and preparing herself ahead of time to be sensitive to God's leading. And if she was going, "Well, my request is," and God stomped on her toe and said, "Not now." And she was sensitive enough to that to say, "How about another feast? If you'll come tomorrow, we'll do the same thing. I'll tell you then. I promise." You know? So, I don't know. I wonder, was that the original plan? Did God stop her at that moment? Sorry. For some reason? I don't know. But it's just, as I read this and try to play it out in my head, that's just a question that comes to mind. Also, you got to think, too, this is the king that she just told no. "I'm not going to tell you what I want. You come tomorrow, and I'll tell you." This is the king she's now playing games with. "I can tell you, I'll tell you tomorrow. Joke, joke, ha ha, flirt, flirt, maybe. I don't know." But, exactly. He had been drinking. Did it have anything to do with it? I don't know. But he could have demanded at that moment in time for her to tell him. And he didn't.
Then she'd known it was God's time.
I guess she wouldn't have had a choice. I mean, sometimes God's will is that evident, right? Where you don't have a choice either way. Exactly. So then she says, "My wish and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king." Well, we know she had back in the inner court, but I guess with this guy you could probably fall out of favor pretty fast. So she repeats it. "If I found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." And like I said, it's kind of like one of those serial TV shows where what a place to stop for us because it kind of leaves us hanging. But I want to leave you with this. In our book on page 81, as I was reading, this struck me as she talked about Esther. And I thought, this is an interesting way, a very introspective way for us to finish the lesson. And if you look at Elizabeth George's description of Esther, and you kind of take Esther's name out of that and you just put yours in there, and then you might want to make it present tense instead of past tense because it's kind of weird to talk about yourself in past tense since we're all still here. But if you say, okay, a list of Chris's excellent qualities includes faith, determination, purpose, and resolve. Not only is she cool and calm, but she acts with wisdom and discernment, speaks with sweet speech and confidence, and carries out her plans with courage, assurance, and valor. This is what Elizabeth George writes about Esther. But wouldn't be too terribly disappointed if somebody could say this about me. And why can it be said about Esther and not said about me when Esther's God, who enabled her to do what she did, is my God? The same one yesterday, today, and forever. So Esther's God, my God, and the God of my children. You know, I would encourage you, if you don't want to jot this down, at least you have the book. Look at page 81. That's actually something like through the week, maybe, have it open when you read your Bible in the morning, have your prayer time or something, because that's actually something that would make an incredible prayer to pray over yourself each day, that God would make this kind of person out of you and out of me. Okay, let's close in prayer, and we are done for tonight.